So thank you guys for joining us in the evening for this webinar. Thank you very much and welcome to the third of the second of the series of webinars of COG. Without much ado, I'll just start off today's discussion with Navin. I think most of the times when we actually sit for discussions, right? Or even when we are actually going for our work or even when we talk to clients, a lot of the time is spent on the context, right? Most of the time, probably about 50 to 60% of time goes on understanding the context, right? And we spend a lot of time asking those kind of questions. So I'll ask Navin this as to what is this context, Navin? I think, and why do we spend so much time on this context? While most of the times you hear people talk about content and category and brand and so on and so forth, while here we focus more on the other side of context. So if you can just tell us what is this context and why do you spend so much time on that?
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's an interesting question, and they're all very big words. This context and content. I wish I had come up with some better titles for it. But before I kind of explain what it is, I wanted to I was also thinking how to answer this question. I knew you were going to ask me this. And I think I had to kind of step back and look at a point where I was not doing this. I was not focusing so much on understanding who people are. And I'm going to say this in the context of work, but I think it happens even in the context of life. And I've witnessed myself do this more often, even outside the context of work itself. So for about 14 years of my career before I joined Center of Gravity, I worked in advertising. I was a strategic planner, both mainly in the US, but we had a planning division, and you would do quote unquote customer research or understanding customers or understanding people, whatever you want to call it. And there is a standard format in which how this work is done. There are constructs like writing discussion guides, inviting a set of people. There it's almost clinical, where you're put into some kind of a room and there is a one-way mirror and people are watching it from the other side, and the discussion guide is actually timed. Meaning if it's a 1 hour discussion or a 2 hour discussion, it is broken into 5-minute intervals. The first 5 minutes, the moderator will ask this and we will talk about this. Then they will do this, etc. And this is how it was constructed, almost like if you had imagined a script for having a conversation. And the pie chart, if you were to draw a pie chart of how much time was spent understanding the people, though theoretically we were supposed to understand our customers, almost all the time is spent on understanding these people in what we call the content, which is what do they do in this category. So if I'm talking about, if I was doing it for Washington Mutual Bank, I was interested only in how they were interacting with the bank's features and services and comparing, one bank to another, and looking at advertising and stimulus that they're throwing at them. We are trying to understand them as customers. By definition, a customer is somebody who has bought something from you. And then, you'll have high frequency customers and low frequency customers, etc. My relationship with that individual was in the context only of how they behaved in the category. And we used to have this 5 minutes in the beginning that was given to the moderator. This is where the moderator's quote unquote skill is supposed to come, which is called warm up, which is when she'll kind of go around the room, ask people to tell who they are, what their background is, and everybody kind of smiles at each other and they all dive in and then talk about the product and its categories. And of course, we believe we got great insights and campaigns, etc. would have been done on it. And that's the nature of how work used to happen. I don't think it is different by and large, even today, with most places where strategic thinking work is happening. When I came to COG 9 years back, and at that time I still didn't really get the idea, and I kind of learned how human-centered work really happens. I knew we did strategic work. And I remember going on what we would have traditionally called customer research, but essentially we went to people's houses and stores and in spaces and we talked to them, and I kind of observed how other people did it, and then I also started getting comfortable doing it. And I remember this, I think it fell into my place where Rajesh, actually, one of the partners at Center of Gravity, told me that the idea is to focus not on understanding customers, but on understanding people. That if I forget the fact that I'm working on a certain category, my interest exists in my head. But I am interested in finding out what they do in their category, but I'm way more interested in understanding who they are as people, which means I'm interested uh, in who their parents were, where they grew up. I'm interested in the nature of the township they grew up in, what their upbringing was like. Was it very strict? Was it more liberal? What kind of friendships they formed? What kind of gangs they had in school? How did they choose the education stream they chose? How did they choose the career they chose? How did they choose the person they married? If they have children, what are their dreams for their children? What schools they choose? Now, what does this have to do with the product category? Initially, on face value, absolutely nothing. But actually, if you look into it, it has all the values embedded in that. The idea is that if we understand somebody as closely as we understand our family members, then we can, to reasonable accuracy, almost predict how their decision making is going to happen across categories, what will be the basis of choice. Now, this all sounds theoretical. I'll tell you the example where it kind of fell into my head and I kind of dove into it. I'm not naming the names of the customers for obvious confidentiality reasons. But this was for a large financial services company in India. You can talk about any of the giants. They'll have banks and insurance companies and investment companies and so on and so forth. We were working on the life insurance division. And one of the sets of conversations we were going to have was the series of their high-performing agents or salespeople. And I was talking to this lady, it was in Bombay. Let's call her Varsha. Now, Varsha comes in, she sits in a meeting. She looks like, I would say, should have been in her about 40s. She looked a 40-year-old woman dressed in a traditional sari, the Mughal sutra, everything else. And she didn't quite fit my idea of what a financial services person would look like. And by her own admittance, later on in the conversation, she said that she looked atypical. Now, when we started talking to her, and we asked her to tell about her life and how she came to be, and this is the narrative that she told. Now, Varsha is a middle class, and I grew up in Bombay, and I can imagine the kind of homes that would be like government type C flats, if you can imagine like that. It'll be small rooms, small square foot area, cookie cutter homes. She lived in a place like that. Her husband had a job which would have been like an accountant or like a clerical job, and she was focused on making her son and daughter study and do well in life. That was the real focus. She wanted them to do great, and she was not planning on working, but they found it hard to make ends meet in line with their ambition, so she had to find work. So she finds another clerical job, but that still wasn't enough for her to run her household. So she's constantly looking for some way to make better money. And at that point in time, she intersects with an ad that comes in the newspaper that says, be your own boss. And she had time pressures. So she went up. She had no idea about financial services or anything like that. She went for the interview. She went to the interview by carrying her vegetables in that typical bag after finishing her grocery shopping. She went all like that in the way she was dressed, and she walked into the interview. And it was the lady who was interviewing her. And she's told that she herself was thinking, how am I going to get this job? Because I don't look like anything like the person sitting on the other end. And that person also apparently was thinking the same thing. How the hell is Varsha going to be able to do this job? But she said, I had to do it. I had no alternative. So I took it upon myself saying, whatever happens, I will make this succeed. And from there starts her journey. And today, she would have been considered in the top 5% of all high-performing agents in the country for that brand. And she'll be very well respected. There is a whole battalion of new people who look up to her. And somewhere along the conversation, you realize that now the conversation is, you've succeeded. She's come to the point where she, because of her rewards and recognition for the great job she has done, she's taken her family to Europe and everything else, and her children have studied in Australia, and she's come a long way in her journey. Now, this could be a typical story anywhere else, but what you realize in the context of this conversation is two things. That Now I understand why her ratings are incredibly high, which is that we did this entire project at the time of the recession, where insurance agents had a reputation for not meeting their customers anymore, especially if you had taken insurance products that are investment products, because the portfolios had tanked. So they were literally not taking calls from customers. That is not the case with this lady and other women like her. What we understood from her is that for her, the alternative of if she failed at this job and or if the reputation was tarnished, she could not do work anymore. She would have to go back to the kitchen. She would lose that avenue for self-expression that she had found. That was one huge thing. Therefore, while other agents have reputations of cheating, women would never do it. I would have never discovered this unless I had seen her life journey. I know what is at stake for her because I know this, life context from where they have come. The other thing is, and this is something that the penny dropped because the client used to think like that. They didn't have a huge army of women at this point in time in their agent base, but the ones that were there were succeeding very well, but they're not planned and gone and looked at women. That doing this kind of a job, a financial services job where you're going and meeting clients and talking about finances, is very different from the quote unquote jobs that women are given permission to do, which is that whatever is considered in patriarchal society as a woman's job, which is, oh, you make laddus, so maybe you can sell that in your neighborhood. Oh, you know dance, so maybe you can teach children how to dance. These are women's jobs that are extension of the role that she plays at home, which can have a manifestation outside and she can earn side money. Financial services had the construct of I also go out, I have my own clients, I have meetings, I can play at this level. It is very different from a typical women alone job that exists in the universe. And there are umpteen categories where this has come to bear. When we do the life inquiry deeply, the penny drops in our head of how this category appeals to them, why this brand makes a difference, what is the nature of the job. That was my very first project that I did in Center of Gravity. It is still etched in my mind. And I've seen this happen time and time again. That when we are attuned to understanding who people are, that's my only agenda. I'm genuinely interested in who we meet. And I've seen everybody in COG do that. I have started taking this work experience, I guess you could call it skill. It should be basic human qualities. And I'm now applying it to my family members. It has affected how I interact with my mother. It has made it easier to interact with my kids, with anybody else I meet. I am interested in who they are and what motivates them, rather than focusing on what they are telling me and just intersecting at that level. The relationships have become better. My relationship with my work, with my colleagues, etc., everything works at it. And you have to work at it. And I think it doesn't, because I don't know what has happened to us, but it doesn't come naturally to everybody. But if you work at it, work at understanding this context, the context explains itself and the solutions present themselves to you. You don't really have to struggle too much to do it. So that's a fairly long-winded answer to a simple question, but I felt like I had to tell that to allow people to understand what it is that we are really talking about.
So a couple of questions strikes me, Navin. One, I understand that context and understanding the life script of that person becomes, or the life journey of where he or she comes from is important. What happens to the content then? Because let's say I spend most of the time understanding this person. What happens from a category perspective? Is it important, not important? How does it actually pan out for us as we watch? That is the first one. Second is it a bit unnerving for clients? Because they come in with a complete thought of, "Arey, मेरे को मेरा category समझना है. तुम लोग क्या पूछने वाले हो? तुम लोग पूछा ही नहीं ये सब." So there is a huge, the client may potentially find it as unnerving. So how does this work out? I mean, so finally, what happens with the clients? What does he see at the end of it, and what makes? I understand when you're telling me this that there is a perspective and a lens to look at things, but what happens at the client's end? Does it really make a difference?
That's an interesting. I'll answer the second question. I'll park that for a while because it feels a little self-serving, and I didn't want to do that. But the first part, which is the content, what happens to the content? Is it not important? I think. And based on all the experiences we've had, the content is absolutely important. You want to get into that. But spending time in understanding the context and being deeply interested in that opens them up so that they tell everything. Like you don't have to imagine what needs to get asked. It becomes a very natural journey, because if I have met some, let's say, a teenager who's always, I'm not using names, but who's always hesitated, who's the good son, who's always followed what his parents have told him to do, and he's made choices because of what they have done, not under authoritarian pressure, but maybe, let's say, burden of love, and that's what he has been struggling with. You can understand where every choice, even though they may look like trivial, which might like be a choice about what brand to wear or not to wear, fashion choice, is seen through that lens, because even though the people whose respect he is trying to earn are not in the room, not there, he feels the need to live up to something that they've created. But dealt with deeply, the content understanding will come anyway in the conversation. What you get while the conversation is happening, meaning happens in our head. It's very easy to understand. So I could have 4 different people buy exactly the same product, and they have bought it. If I didn't have the contextual understanding, I would club all 4 of them as the same people, but they are not. They would have entered to this zone through 4 different vectors, right? Therefore, if I have to, let's say, influence 2 of those people who came from a very different vector, the kind of stimulus I'll have to create will have to appeal to their contextual understanding. Otherwise, it's vanilla. It's just that here is a product, buy it and go. Who you are doesn't matter to what you buy. I don't think we buy like that. We are designed to seek meaning even in inanimate objects, to understand what meaning needs to be imparted. Contextual understanding is crucial to that. So I think the content comes by itself. But I understand where you came, the second part of your question, especially when you say clients are going to say, holy cow, I spent all this money to understand my category, and this guy has gone on into, some deep personal inquiry, and how will the 2 fit? I think partly we do it by, of course, educating the client. But the belief system to do this work is to think that that time is infinite, actually. If you build relationships with the person whom we are talking to, and the relationship is just this, and it kind of goes back to one of the webinars we had earlier, which is on the idea of listening and keeping our ears open to it and our bodies open to it. That if you're focused on understanding context, listening becomes easier, because you're not looking for meaning in their life at that point in time. You're just trying to absorb it all in. Once the contextual frame has happened, when you shift to the content, and if the content, let's say in a 2-hour conversation, the content is only 25 minutes, that 25 minutes will be gold because of the 1.5 hours you've spent on the contextual understanding. The meaning comes crystal clear to us. And I think clients are able to see that when you tell them this is the way to think of it. And a belief that once you've had a 2-hour conversation, if you missed out on anything because you are no longer that prisoner of a discussion guide, and every 5 minutes you have to change tracks, the relationship is built in the 2-hour call. Whatever you missed, you can pick up the phone, speak to them, and they'll tell you what you missed. And you'll still make sense of it because you established the relationship. That's been the journey, and it's a learning journey for anybody who works in this field. Whether you work in center of gravity or not is not important. But anybody who wants to understand human beings and influence them, contextual understanding is crucial skill to build. And I think it's actually a strategic exercise. You're not doing contextual understanding because you want to, feel good and, get some warm fuzzies going. Contextual understanding is a grounding strategic exercise, so that when you're clustering customers together, you're now going to cluster by people who had similar life context, and you will see that their behaviors are in line with that life context. So with a small set, we just concluded a project, and I think this is not concluded, we're in the final stages of it, and we did it during the age of Corona. It's for a US-based client, and the audience we are interacting with are doctors of repute, like you think Mayo Clinic. These will be people who are in positions of power. We were supposed to do about 25 odd conversations. We did about exactly half. We did about 13 or 14 of them, if I'm not mistaken. And we did this clustering based on that. But because our inquiry is always to find context, even in this Zoom call based inquiry, and I would say that compared to what we do on a regular basis, the contextual understanding far less here, but we are focused on finding context. The the clustering falls bang on because you've gone down this inquiry. And I think it is something that any client or any student or any person wanting to go down this journey should embrace. And some of the principles that we'll always tell, right? One of the most important principles is to figure out in this conversation, who are you and who are they? Which is, my context is that I am some researcher and you are the respondent or interviewee, right? I am going to come and research you. It's a certain tone of conversation. I'm already taking an expertise position and standing here, and the other person is going to be one of anxiety so that they don't come across as a fool. Versus, if I take the position that I'm genuinely interested in knowing who you are because I actually don't know anything, and whatever you say is of interest to me, wherever you take the conversation, I'm going to follow that. Let's just chat. It's freeing for both parties, and that usually gives magic. We call it losing status and control. I don't have any status, I don't have any control. I'm giving both over to the other party, and allow for conversation to be organic. Don't be under pressure to say that I need to find everything in this 1.5 hours that is allotted to me. No. 1.5 hours, I'll deeply understand you. Everything will happen. Whatever is left unanswered, I will have the permission, not just the permission, I'll have the desire from the other end to continue this conversation because I have been interested in what they're interested in. That's what we say, the search for contextual understanding. But context allows you to explain the content. Without context, the content understanding is suboptimal. It is not powerful enough to give you consistently great results. And that's our worldview at least.
It's basically trying to understand the why of what they are doing. It's almost, it explains the behavior of that.
Yeah. And in many ways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Finish it.
Right.
I'm saying in many ways, if you ask the whys, they won't be able to tell you. They themselves have not had this inquiry. We ourselves haven't had this deep inquiry, unless somebody else comes and wants to listen to my story. The penny drops in our head many times. I remember I was surprised. It had never happened to me in my, in my erstwhile career before, but it has happened repeatedly here. And I've seen it happen to other people who do this kind of work, is that at the end of a 2-hour conversation, and we record this on video, and sometimes clients are surprised, like, what did you give these guys so that they, told you all these things, and why are they telling you these things? They are amazed that people tell you that. But some of the best conversations, I still get calls from some of these people, and we don't do projects on those categories anymore, but I still take the calls. They say, well, can I get a copy of that recording? Because nobody has listened like this before. They themselves didn't know that this is who they were, and therefore they chose these things, but subconsciously they were making these choices. So you're invoking a day of self-reflection and hopefully better understanding of the self, and you're touched by the fact that you were a witness to that journey, right? And I think once we go down this path, solutions present themselves. You don't have to struggle to find a strategic thought, because it's like me. I remember my parents had never had the means to buy a car. I was the one who bought them their first car. But I knew for a fact there was no way. And my dad can't drive, my mom can't drive, so they have to keep a driver. And I bought this when we were in the US, and it had to be a Maruti. There was not even an inquiry. There was no question of not buying a Maruti. It had to be a Maruti. It could have been one of those hatchbacks. And she told me these models. Why? Because that's what my dad is. He's a central government pay and accounts officer who retired with, and he didn't make tons of money because he was too honest. Neither did he take, the leaps of leaving the safety of a government job and chasing the private sector. Those capabilities are far higher than his. He's always done the safe, time and tested place in his life, because that's who he is, and that's what is the life lesson he would have wanted to impart to his children also. You study, you do your hard work, you keep your head down, and over time people will see what you're good at, and you be contented with what you have. No big dreams in that sense. And that's his philosophy. It will be reflected in the choices that he makes. And it was the level of strength. And I told him, why don't you try Hyundai? Why don't you at least look at something else? It's not even like you're paying for it. I'm indulging myself, and I think, no, this is it. This is what we want. That's what we'll take. And I think If we knew our customers like that, if we knew any stranger you met in a plane like that, if you're actually interested in understanding them, to no other end other than to get a better understanding of the human spirit. It is amazing how this contextual understanding is brilliant. I was telling somebody else this yesterday. Over the last weekend, I watched a master class from Bob Woodward. He was one of the journalists who exposed Watergate for the Washington Post, and he does a master class on investigative journalism. Right? Sorry?
Telling it.
Yeah, I think I was telling you only, right? That's right. My memory is not as good. So doing contextual understanding not good for memory. But Bob Woodward, in his entire narrative, I was looking for how investigative journalism works. So one of the interesting things he said, and many of our work mirrors investigative journalism, which is the reason I wanted to watch it. He talks about talking to presidents, the heads of the CIA, and all the people he has interviewed over his long career, and he's written a lot of modern history books on politics and the White House across different administrations. He's deeply interested in knowing where those people, which hometowns they grew up, what was the nature of the town, which schools did they attend, what did they study, how did they marry who they married. And he says that this all helps you make sense of the person and their motivations. It's pretty much what we are saying. And he's doing it at that level. He says, why do you want to know that? The long litany of career choices in front of you. You can only look at that to make sense of the man. But says, no, that's absolutely important. You have to do both. You have to understand the content, no doubt. But if you don't have the context, you will miss contextual understanding, which will powerfully illuminate for you why this person made these choices that you, on the face of it, felt like they should not have done. But once you know that, it'll fall into your head. And I think
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
So one you're saying is that it gives a lens to the behavior as to the why of it. And second, you're saying that this can actually help you parse or segment certain kind of people, even though they may show the same behavior, purchase behavior, but they may actually fall in different kind of segments based on the context, right? And that segmentation probably is far more powerful than doing a demographic cohort or a psychographic cohort, which may not necessarily explain the behavior. It's actually very interesting because I remember a few years back, a technology firm came to us. I don't know if you remember Loyalties. So they said, we know everything about customers. Right, we know everything, how they buy. We can exactly tell you how they use the loyalty points. We know, and most of our clients who has database also, that we know what he is going to buy. I can tell you, but we don't know who he is, and we don't know why he or she is doing that. Right? Yeah. Even with technology and with so much of nuanced data that you have, that you still are not able to put the why, and that is in most of this. I mean, some of the clients where, whether be technology or people at database, huge amount of databases, really struggling to put it, and their kind of segmentation looks very, very different. Yeah. And they're able to explain that segmentation to the buying behavior or why they are doing it like that. So it's very interesting that we're able to capture the context like that and be able to segment it.
Yeah, and so I think that they are both required. But the power is on the contextual understanding, because we are not static, even as human beings. I'm saying I'm approaching my 50s, as are everybody else in the leadership of center of gravity. And I think there is a lot more changes that are going to come in my life, that if you just made it a prediction of just my past behavior in terms of what my choices have been, that my future can be predicted, chances are you'll miss that. Chances are you'll not get it right.
How do you address that? I mean, let's say that, because most of the times we do a segmentation based on context and a certain understanding of the past, but that can change.
It can.
So will you revisit it? What happens?
I think, like we tell this because I'm talking again in the context of strategic decision making. We tell all clients, right, that every strategy is the best next starting point for you to do a series of actions, but you should revisit it every so often, every 4 years, 5 years. I don't think people's lives change on a daily basis at that intensity unless you've had some crisis that's got into the case. But every 3 to 5 years or so, you should take a pulse of going back and visiting what changes have happened to your customers' lives, because the overall context in which they exist may have changed, or some seismic shifts may have happened, like the coronavirus right now that everybody is talking to about new normal. I think when we come out of this, every category, if they're sincere about serving their customers, to deeply inquire what are the anxieties and the life choices, and what is the muscle memory they have retained, and what will be the future evolutionary thought they have that is pervading, other than the superficial thing of, okay, I cannot get out of home and I'm concerned about my health. There may be other structural shifts like this that they happen, but these are once in a while events. But in the natural course of evolution of my life, like I said, I'm approaching 50. Maybe my thoughts are dual. Maybe it's mortality is one aspect of it. Equally, fearing of missing out on that the first 50 years of my life have sucked and I've not really done it. Maybe there is an accelerated timeline for exploration that's possible. Now, both may be things that I'm willing to look towards. But that'll be within my life context. What will be the pressures? What will I be pushing? Are things that are going on in my head. And I don't think I'll be alone in this. Similarly, looking into life contextual inquiry periodically is also critical, as is the analysis of your data to see what are people buying. I'm not saying it's one versus the other, but the meaning is usually found in the context. The behavior will give you incremental results up to a point, but once people change, that is basically predicting the future based on the past. But human beings are creators. They create new things, new thoughts happen. If all we focused on is just sell people what they bought in the past, you will not get anything new. And I think that has been my contention for a choice between big data versus contextual understanding. It's a false choice. You need both. And you can't give one up for the other. I guess one pivot has happened to the data side of things, but it's coming back, because I think the inquiry is coming from the guys who are holding the data and saying that I'm not able to explain this data to somebody. Tell me the stories of it. That's the inquiries we are getting. So I think it's going to come back to some balance, and I think that's inevitable.
So time is around
6:40. I think you should take questions. Let's hear other people.
For the questions, I'll ask you the first one, because this has been running in my mind also, on the big data story. Now we read and we hear quite a lot, right? About not just Facebook or Amazon or even Google, that even before you know it yourself, that the algorithm can predicate, are you a gay or are you normal? What is your inclination towards a certain kind of categories? Even before you know, it has already mapped you fully to a certain extent, right? Mm-hmm. And it actually is starting to dish out those kind of things without you being aware of it also. That's what you start to hear. So in that context, if Google or somebody sells that data, or even if they are already doing it, and they are already doing it basis your behavior digitally, it's not that they are talking to you and understanding you deeply. What is the use of contextual understanding in the way that we practice? Just more a thought. All of us can chip in, but because if algorithms are able to start creating a very deep profile, which you yourself may just be understanding, and be able to dish out those kind of stuff even before you know, and not just gender, or not just about sexual preference. It could be about a career, jobs, all of those political, like what Cambridge Analytica did, for example. In that context, how do we differentiate between the big data and life context and doing it the way we do? Or is it that we are saying that it could move to an algorithm based story, but that itself is very powerful, and that can actually be the next jump?
I don't have a crystal ball to see who's going to win in this race. It again comes back to the same argument, right? Somebody's got to write that algorithm. You got to start somewhere. Now, if you're saying that, no, you don't really need to know how to write the algorithm. Algorithm will write itself based on collecting data points of human behavior of the past, and that will be good enough to predict in a completely new scenario, how the human being is likely to respond. I have my skepticism to that. It sounds fantastical, but I'm not so sure that that works until it has been proved, right? Then the other thing I've always seen is this is my personal bias, so take it for what it is. That we always end up doing this as human beings. That's our analogy. You take the best of an example of one category and compare it to the worst of the other, whichever suits your fancy. So you will show Cambridge Analytica, but like you were talking about loyalty rewards, for example, earlier, right? And I was reflecting on that. I'm a member of, as I'm sure everybody on this call, you're all members of every loyalty program that you have a brand that you may have subscribed to. Do you really think that they are getting you? Have you seen evidence of that in your own life, or are you just bombarded with nonsense? So somewhere that may be a destination you want to get to. But what is evident and visible and clear, like I said, you could get it by talking to 20 or 30 carefully handpicked people and go down the path of inquiry and get to a great starting point, which has to combine with the data that you're collecting. I'm not saying reject one or the other. It's not a race in which it's like the classic American thing, right? You're talented, he has potential, let's race them and see who wins. That's the choice that I'm looking to. Both need to exist, but the pendulum has swung to the other side because it is sexy. It captures all the covers of all the business magazines and big data. So everybody feels happy by saying, oh, we've got, I think yesterday we were talking, this software is looking at 1 billion data points. And now that one will look at 3 billion data points. 3 billion is such a huge number, and we all think that it's going to give you wisdom of the universe until it actually gives it to you, right? And does that for you. I'm going to hold my judgment on it in the context of letting go of the other. I'm not saying the false choice is let go of this and climb over to the other side. I'm saying you need both. And it's great that these tools have come. They still need contextual explanation and meaning to be given by human beings who will have to sift through the data. And so that I think is still required. Somebody has to program that algorithm, or the initially generated algorithm will have to have a contextual overlay, and it will still need to get relooked at every 5 years. Now, whether the methodology is deep human inquiry or somebody having this construct in their head and looking at data, that's a evolutionary tool, right? But I think that's only in the context of work, Vijay. But I'm saying if I want to have deep, meaningful relationships with my family members, my friends, and everything else, I can't have an algorithm do that for me. So that part will anyway exist. You know, as a witness to some chaos that was happening yesterday in my house, where two teenage, one she'd still want to be called a teen. She'll turn a teen in November, and the other one is full-blown teen. And my wife, late at night, 1 o'clock, and they were throwing hammer at tongs at each other, and I couldn't believe it. The fight was over. Somebody took somebody's toothpaste, and this was it. It went on for an hour and a half. My natural inclination, if I'd gone back in time and had been the Navin of 3 years ago, would have to come down like with an authoritarian father and say how you're all stupid and go to your corners, right? And I just held back and just observed. It's literally the struggle of a preteen now starting to exert her dominance, and the other one, they're all trying to establish that the relationships and the centers of gravity of our relationships with each other and my mother are shifting, and you need to be cognizant of it. Because today it's like, kumbaya. And I would only add it to the chaos. Maybe it was self-preservation that kept me out of it yesterday, but somewhere there is a kernel of understanding also. And it has come from saying that, okay, I'm just going to stand here and observe and not pass judgment. They're all sane human beings. They are behaving the way they are behaving, and I'm not understanding the context. And finally it got to me. Okay, I get it now. This is why you're coming there again. You'll find your own balance. And I think those kinds of things, contextual understanding is crucial. Work is just one avenue for its expression, a powerful one, but one avenue for it.
For any questions coming up, guys, you can ask.
I think Prashant.
You get Facebook as your client. How do you
cut their data? It's an interesting thing. You want to think of what the solution can be? I don't even know what data they have. First thing, I'll be frightened to see what they have on me, but that's like the first sense of it. How will you cut their data? It's an interesting question. I think I guess their natural index may be on what we like and what we dislike. What are the choices that have helped us build our profiles? But Prashant, I would say that just knowing from the human inquiries we have done, do our Facebook profiles actually tell who we are, or is the projection of who we want to be? It's somewhere in between that. There has to be some way of first understanding that. And if I can get deep life script based understanding or this contextual understanding from Facebook, that would be my starting point, coupled with serious time spent with prototypes of those, representative samples of those users to get a sense to see that it has to be both. What am I seeing in face-to-face? Whenever we have done digital work, it's complemented with both. While I may not have access to Facebook profiles, and we do work on understanding customers, especially in digital phase, a lot of that happens offline, where we are talking, I think the power has gone in my place, and luckily my laptop and my internet is still there, so you're seeing this ghost vision until it comes back. Sorry about that. Welcome to Bangalore. But what I'm saying is that the conversation with the people real live also happens, as is maybe a 3 or 4 month interaction of what they are doing on Facebook or online also happens. And it's a mixing of these two that allows me to say, okay, these are the 5 types of customers that exist in digital for jewelry, let's say, or for financial services, let's say. Specifically, if I'm saying these are the 5-6 types of Facebook people on Facebook that exist, it is possible to. That's the way to do it. The easiest way to do it will be to look at, they are collecting 150 data points, let the software itself show it and cluster it. But that will miss out on the contextual understanding of who are the people who are telling the truth, who are the people who are pretending to tell the truth. Like one tell, I could tell, this is by life observations. If you see, and this is please don't go and judge your friends and families for that, this is what I've observed. If you see significant public display of affection between a husband and a wife on Facebook, that was not there before, relationship is in trouble.
Yeah.
That's my observation.
That is my observation.
Yeah,
but what is interesting, Prashant, just adding on to what Navin said, what we have actually seen is, if you just give us Facebook data without knowing the context, it will become difficult. Then you will have to do some Cambridge Analytica to do it. Okay. What we have seen is the other way around, that if we know the profile of people, and if I actually look at how they are posting on Facebook. So for example, if we know that there is one segment called Modern Traditional, they always post a certain kind of stuff. And then actually to really see if we say, okay, this kind of segment has this kind of behavior, and we actually go and troll their Facebook, it kind of matches. That cohort actually posts those kind of stuff. Or when we did this work for a tire company where there were people who had a SUV, kind of a SUV segment, and then there was a compact SUV and a sedan. And we had certain hypotheses on how they will actually be posting what they do with their cars. And if you look at the Facebook and their Instagram posts, that cohort actually behaved in a certain kind of a way. So once I understand the once I understand the context, it becomes very easy for me it becomes easy to look at how the Facebook data or Instagram data parses out like that. But if you give me the data and then actually ask, how do I actually break it? That becomes a bit difficult. Then it will be like any other company to look at better algorithm, better software to really look at how they are posting, so on and so forth, and then do a segmentation basis there. Or it will be a Cambridge Analytica, which will have a number to do there. But I feel if you give me Facebook data by like that, it may be a bit difficult. But if I understand the customers better, then looking at Facebook and Instagram from that perspective becomes a bit more easier for us. And you're able to predict what they will post, what are the kind of things that they'll feel proud about to display, so on and so forth. Does that answer your question, Prashant? You have actually gone because your Zoom will cut down it by 1 hour exact, right? Right?
No.
There is another 9 minutes left.
Okay. Anything else? Any of you guys want to challenge?
Adding to the Facebook conversation, ideally, actually, you should be able to trust behavior more, right? Because that is like you can measure and there is data. And as human beings, we can't even recollect what happened last week. Yeah. And what I'm telling you are stories. And behavior is basically what I'm really done. So if you have the Facebook data, and if I can cut it by whichever way, by can be through interest, through people's opinions, through likes, any of that measurement, and maybe life stage, lifestyle, all of that I can take, I should be able to get at least 70-80% of a picture of who that person is. And in fact, shouldn't that be more reliable rather than listening to people's stories, which often what we do is it may be very habitual, and we post rationalize what we have done. And when you talk to people, people are telling those stories. So how do you?
So again, I think it's both, and that's always been my vantage point, is that I'm not distrusting behavioral data. There is truth in behavior that this behavior has happened, but the only question I ask is why only rely on behavioral data and not understand contextual data. And I'm not talking about superficial contextual data, right? I'm saying if there is a deep inquiry and I've understood truly who this person is and I've spent time doing that, which will explain the behavioral data, then I have confidence in it. Just to use the behavioral data, then I think, how do we do things like embed meaning into inanimate objects? Behavioral data will just say, I chose a product and I just need to show. I remember this, like one of the clients that we had, and they didn't have a huge success with this. Their entire CRM, and they have across lifestyle product categories. The inquiry was to say that if person A has bought, a certain product, person B has bought. Person B has not. I don't know anything about person B. I'll try to explain this. So, A buys a product, right? C buys a product. A and C have bought. So A and C have bought the same product. That's the way to say. A and C have bought the same things, right? C has bought one thing that A has not. So show that product to him. And that's the theory, right? You're similar. You're trying to cluster people together. Now, I'm taking a very simplistic example of doing this. I'm assuming if you do it over 80 data points, you have greater confidence that the clusters will actually match. And that's the attempt of big data to do. I will get you across 700 data points, etc. The fact of the matter is, whenever we have done work, customers have large databases, 90 lakhs, etc. And they've been doing this. And they says, we have 150 different customer types. And we've been putting messages to them, and we know exactly what they want, and then we can go incremental. But the return on investment on that is marginal. They really don't have a clue of who's coming to their stores. So and then when we go and do and tell them, look, these are the 6 types of customers who broadly come to you. These people you are clustering together. For example, in this case, they say people who buy kids wear must obviously have kids in their family. That's entirely untrue. People are buying for gifts or for somebody else and things like that. And there's a large set of people who didn't know where to go. They went to their omnibus store and then bought whatever they could buy from the kids section for that. They were clustering like that. I think data also lies, as is the truth that you're telling, that we may not have memories on the purchase behavior of last week. But I think what is deeply our context, if you do a deep inquiry, we will be largely consistent with that, is my feeling. Right? My memory of my purchases, if they are not of deep involvement, etc., I will not recollect that. That the data will capture. But the contextual understanding, which is a deep inquiry of who I am as a person, that if I put the customer into that shared common space, what they evoke should be true to that person's, even if it is justified mind, it is true to them. Therefore, if I show a stimulus in that context, they should ideally respond to it.
Dilip, my sense, let's say, for example, again, it's a thought to ponder on, but let's say I cluster people by interest from Facebook. Let's say that there are outdoors people or people who are actually taking their cars to go out in different kind of terrains. And I'm assuming that this set of people are all similar in that context, right? I mean, they are all having the same interest. So I will actually sell a certain kind of stuff to them. But where I'm coming from is very different as to why I'm doing that. So what we have seen, even when we did this work for SUVs, that the reason for people to take out the cars, especially the hardcore SUV guys, was not about adventure and throwing it out of the market. It was the deeper part of them was to connect back to their kids and get them to open, get them to explore nature in a certain way, to make them more ready to face the world, so on and so. That was a very deep motivation for them. The settings was outdoors in that context. But if I'm going to actually put everybody together, arey, chalo, everybody is going on a drive, so let's do this. I'm not sure whether you will actually talk to me or people who are hardcore SUV guys, not me, people who are hardcore SUV guys like that. Or even let's say outdoors people, there will be people who are, who all put outdoor photographs and climbing and all those things here. But the reason I'm going to come to that part, or reason I'm going to go to the mountain is very different. And that behavior I will not be able to capture through Facebook is my sense, unless and until I'm having a long, nice, powerful conversation with each one of us.
Yeah.
That's my sense. I may be able to cluster it, let's say, even if cluster it by, let's say, age, right? That, okay, this set of people are the guys who are really cutting it out there, but I know that the reason that they are doing it is very different. I'll not be able to capture the reason unless and until they put it there, why they are doing it. That I feel may not happen, but in that sense, the context becomes important. Otherwise, it's easy. It's like Amazon, boss. I know that certain kind of people who buy this kind of fridge buys this kind of TV, so let's sell. It may happen, but why I want to do it and why I want to push it, can I actually understand and sell certain other stuff? That may not happen.
But I think you touched upon a point. If conversations are happening on Facebook rather than the profiling or behavioral activity that's happening, conversations on Facebook can be analyzed contextually by a software that mimics what a human being would do in that context. Then you have, I haven't seen anything do that yet, but that's a possibility. When the construct is the same, it's just to get contextual understanding. It can happen in digital also. I'm sure the same setting can be done tomorrow in voice and video, and if you're analyzing it. The idea is to get a contextual understanding at scale. I think it will work. It should work.
I remember Prashant, who is an avid photographer, he will be searching for lenses and all those kind of things. Equally, there will be people who want to spend money searching for all of those kind of things. Equally, amateurs who are searching and who have a certain amount of money, they will also search for the same kind of stuff. And if Canon actually says, ki boss, inko sab mein ek hi, that, okay, these are all the same cluster, Prashant, people like Prashant will not even be part of that. And what Canon tells me or tells the general folks who are searching for that, Prashant may not want to be, may not pick up, it will not talk to Prashant or certain people 1 or 2 rungs lower than Prashant in that context. That's my sense.
But Dilip's point is that if I'm given the amount of data that we put out on the social space, by looking at Prashant's behavior, you'll be able to figure out that he's an avid expert photographer. So it's easy to get.
In fact, I can speak to that person one-to-one now. This entire contextual thing comes from segmentation and all of that, which is maybe the marketing of yesteryears. But if you take the future, why can't, there could be a possibility where just looking at behaviors and speaking to that person on one-on-one.
My sense, one of the things worth considering is that obviously getting a massive amount of data sets around behavior is surely powerful understanding. It will kind of lead to powerful understanding insight. But the nature of the work that we do or many people do is not just about understanding by extrapolating the past. We are trying to create something, and that's the role of strategy. Now, the ability of extrapolating the past to imagine a future looks a little bit tricky because the idea of like a movie or a piece of music, and like who are the guy who try to make a movie, right, with some data points, that IIPM or whatever IPM guy. You really can't create with data sets. It's an act of a leap that comes from understanding that it's an insight that just comes in a moment, which kind of you intersect with your own life, you intersect with things that you've seen around, you intersect with the understanding that you had of the customer. And that leap actually is the reason why we do the understanding. It's not understanding for the reasons of understanding. So I think that in that space, for a Google algorithm to create a West Wing episode or a Google algorithm to create Rahman's next musical, I think in the act of creation, I think there's a big gap. Maybe there's reasonable understanding that can be picked up from behavior. But I think using that data to kind of create a possible future, I think it's going to be a huge gap, because the same sets of data may be available to 10 clients, but the solutions will all be different. The method by which you access the solutions through communication could be different. So I think in the act of creation is where this will fall. at least the way it is today. Maybe things will change, but in the act of creation, surely this will not work. I think.
But I think, Rajesh, what to Dilip's point, I think one thing is true. All good salespeople are selling contextually 1:1. That's what they do. I think they'll try to get a sense of the context to sell, unless you're a, some commodity seller. But even that, there can be a differentiation. A good bartender over time tries to figure out who this audience is and then creates for them. So contextual understanding is what you do normally. And I think Dilip's right. The idea of segmentation, etc., became a challenge because you had to do this clustering so you could communicate. Now, when you get into an era where everybody can serve 1:1, technology enabled, still their contextual understanding is what is going to be valuable, rather than just say behaviorally, person X did this, so therefore you take this. I think it will go that way. It'll be a combination of both.
What I'm telling you now, Navin, is that if I look at all your father's behavior, it will be, let's assume, Maruti, it can be LIC, whatever. It is an obvious extrapolation you can create.
Correct.
But if I'm doing a project and strategy, my entire trip is to change their behavior, which is why all of this thinking is required.
Correct.
The details of how he has behaved in the past, I can only extrapolate the past, and that's not the future that anybody wants, because that's a competitive game that anybody can play with the data.
I'm saying he was not my target. Like if I was going to, I'm just giving you an example. If I want to change his behavior, I'll be able to do it in such a way just to either challenge him or dovetail into what he actually naturally believes, and therefore he'll take the next leap, right? I think that's a creation act. We're not saying that context will help you create. Context will help you understand so that creation can happen.
So if you did have all data about your father, every single piece of data, is that data sufficient enough to move him from a Maruti to a Hyundai, or a Maruti to a BMW, or a Jaguar? I mean, is that data sufficient, or is there something else at work when you create or when you kind of change things?
No, but I'm saying if I genuinely interested in moving him from one to another, I'll know the vector with which I'll have to move it. The battle was not worth my while, so I just gave in to what he wanted. But what I'm saying, if that was my intended target segment and I was the competitor and I had to get him to buy mine, there are ways of doing that. But I can't wish away the fact that contextual understanding is critical for me to know where he stands right now. So then whatever evolutionary leap I want to take, we'll have to be cognizant of that, right? It's not like I'm trading anything for anything. That's why I think that's why I always feel like the argument between data and to not call context data itself is wrong, but data and context is a false one. Never been a believer in that. I think there are needs for both, but usually we get it trapped into this. That is better than this, and that is a disservice to both actually.
There is a question from Tulsi. Can you see this?
Hang on, sorry. Strategy and communication. What is your take on strategy and communication is based on contextual understanding, but when it comes to targeting audience, we use sharp data trends or points, especially in digital. Okay, trying to understand. I'm not entirely sure I got it. Did you guys figure out the question?
Tulsi can unmute and talk to us.
Yeah, maybe Tulsi, you can unmute and clarify it. I just want to make sure I heard the question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good, yeah. Thank you for the question.
Okay, so I just wanted to understand one thing. While, for example, when we're doing strategy and developing communication and all, it's based on deep consumer understanding and the way you guys do it, understanding consumers through the stories they say and stuff like that. But more and more, especially in digital, that I'm seeing that, when the communication is being targeted, you use specific data points like that Facebook audience behavior patterns or lookalike audience and stuff like that to target that same piece of communication. So do you think that's fine, or that there is a balance there, or what's your take on that? Am I more clear with the question?
Yeah. So I think if I heard right is that most of the targeting tools that are available, especially on digital, are, I guess, behavior trends, because that's what is being captured by those that are selling eyeballs to brands. I guess I
Yes.
think that would be a fair assumption. And it's a paradox, actually. Yes, I think ideally those very gatekeepers of this data, if they were so interested, they should build contextual understanding of their audiences and give it to us, right? Or we have to build our own contextual, bridge the gap. Like we build context, and therefore, what data points does it translate to? So it's a contextual understanding and the data point understanding from a single source that we are capturing, and then go and pick and choose from the data points that they give to you. That would be, and I'm not a media planner, so that I can't tell you, but I think that would be a better way of marrying one to other rather than keeping these two things discrete. So you're creating what you're creating and delivering it to the exact same audience that you created what you've created. But it's easy when you're getting, a ton of data lists to look through and make your choices on Facebook, and planning is easy to do. And clearly you have real-time adjustments to the successes of the past that are built into it to get swayed by things like to like analysis. If person has exhibited this behavior, then show the same thing to them. I think it's at that stage where you'll have to test your contextual understanding into Facebook kind of metric profiles and see whether that gives you better results than just going after behavioral things. It depends on the kind of message you're trying to put out there to see. So that will be that's the battle you run up against, because how do you explain this? I'm trying to get a good analogy for it. The idea, and I'm assuming you're talking about display reach in Facebook, right? Or you're talking specific call to action in many of these. Hello?
No, probably display reach, yeah.
Yeah, so when you're thinking display reach, right, and you're getting eyeballs reached of that kind of an audience, I think it's easy for us to believe that the right audience has been reached. Would you really know a difference? And I'm not somebody who's bought Facebook advertising, so you'll tell me, but that if you actually stuck to your contextual understanding and then translated that contextual understanding, says people who exhibit these 7 things on Facebook, I'm going to put it to them, rather than optimize continuously based on trends that they show you, like behaviors, etc. Just hold the ground. Would you say that your reach or your effectiveness measures are any different? Does that clarify my thought? I'm saying.
Yeah, it does, because I mean, it's just that I've been thinking about it, that if you've developed something which is based on a certain kind of a consumer that you have understood through their stories and their journeys, and which obviously means that whether their triggers or their behavior or their barriers could be slightly or more different than a trend, what that is throwing to you as your potential consumer. So it could be that what you have developed would have appealed to a certain consumer because you have kept that person in mind while you're showing it to somebody else.
Correct. So do you take digital as a reach building mechanism because it can give you a target, ostensibly Facebook and Google can give you a targeted audience so that wastage is less?
Yeah.
But is the impact really high? I don't know. Just because of that reach. But we all get the dashboards and we all get the performance metrics and we get it near real time. It feels like, yeah, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's like we are often told by digital agencies and even digital people that because the medium allows such sharp targeting, and there is no wastage, and you exactly know your customer. So sometimes I do doubt that because of these two different theories of approaching.
So
Vijay, can you see there are a couple of questions?
Sure. Hello?
Can you see the questions?
Yeah.
So on the Q&A section, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, this is triggered by the Varsha example you gave. You know, Bollywood and everybody loves to tell us how different how different each region of our country is. How Gujarati is typically different from Punjabi or Tamilian. Based on your experience, what's your feeling? How similarly or differently do people behave? You want to take this on, Vijay?
Tell us how differently of course, there is this stereotypical thing of North versus South, Tamilian versus Punjabi. So there are obviously behavioral differences we do see, right? Either in terms of what they buy, what they want to put outside their house, and so on and so forth. And but let's say when you actually look from a context perspective, we have many times come across that where you can cluster, let's say, Tamilian versus and a Delhiite together. Especially we are doing this work for Cotton World, right? And there was a set of people, and there was a certain kind of a audience and a consumer for Cotton World. And the going in hypothesis was in Delhi, you will find this lot of that thing that they will show off lots and they will do all of those things. But this kind of customer was very similar, be it Delhi, be it Chennai, be it Bombay, be it anywhere else. So that once you know that the kind of customer that a Cotton World is, and therefore you see it across all those, it actually goes against what you feel that a Delhiite versus a Tamilian versus whatever it is, right? So you feel that if the behavioral traits and context that kind of evens out between states, right, most often. But there are equally times where you see there are certain subdued kind of a behavior of a South Indian versus a Delhiite, right? And then you're able to put them together. So if I look at it from the outside, yes, there is difference between a Delhi and a Tamilian versus a Delhiite. But when you actually look at it from the context and therefore you're able to see it, then you're able to cluster them actually together. Then the state does not become a barrier. Of course, there will be some differences which you take cognizance of and then you keep it on the side. Right? But especially in certain kind of cult brands like Cotton and all those things, it actually cuts across. Right? This kind of customer is very, very similar. Let it be in Punjab, interior Punjab, to a Delhi, to a Bombay, to a Bangalore. So once you see that, then state borders does not matter. But if you look at it from the outside, of course, there are a lot of differences. And strategy, that's why I say that we actually look for similarities. Because if you start looking at differences, you will find hundreds. And then you won't know how to actually curb them together. So you look for similarities, and that actually works across state borders, right? There may be some differences. If it is acute, then you actually bring it up. If it is not, you drop it. But what you have seen is that contextually, you will find people similar across. That's my sense.
But isn't Delhi a part of the context as well?
Sorry?
Isn't Delhi and growing up in Delhi with a certain different kind of stimulus a part of the context as well?
Possible, but I'm saying that if see it growing in Delhi, growing in Chennai, and if I see that the context is the same, like let's say for example, how I was brought up, how I was actually treated, whatever it is, if these two are the same, I'll put them together, no, Raj?
I think there will be a Delhi context to it, but I think what you generally end up finding is that life context, upbringings, your family context, the way you were brought up, the kind of life choices you made at pivotal moments, usually paint a pattern of you that transcends the cultural distinctions of a geography. Usually that is much more homogeneous to cluster these people, even though they live in different geographies together. On the surface, it looks like all Delhi. You'll get all this, people tell, right? Delhi is very fashion conscious, so we push the fashion quotient of the merchandise in Delhi far higher, and nobody in Chennai will have, avant-garde lives, but that's all not true. The proportion.
The same kind of behavior of a Rangila in a Chennai versus somebody who is in Delhi.
There is another question. Can you just answer? It's by Divya.
What is a good method to find out the stories that will click for a new product? I guess, and Divya, I'm assuming this is true. You can chime in if it is wrong. I'm assuming this is a product that doesn't exist at any point in time. And I guess this exploration will happen to understand what is this, if your intent of creating this product is to solve a problem that either is felt or it is accepted as this is the way the world exists, so I don't even express that, but you have felt it, which is why you are creating this product. And the nature of inquiry will be the same, which is understanding the life context and understanding the category context or the content in which people are living today, to determine which kinds of people are feeling the pain that you have experienced. I'm assuming the product genesis has come from somewhere. You identify the problem. But the life context inquiry is still important even there, because it will give you nuances for whom to pitch your product to, who are the people who are likely to jump on board first, who are the people who are likely to be more resistant, who will need a lot more taste of the pudding before they actually jump on board. I think that still exists. The manner of inquiry is still the same. I'm here to understand you, and you probably even tell that we will talk about a new product that I'm designing to solve this specific problem. I also want to understand how this problem exists with you. I think that's the way I would approach it. Not knowing anything about what your product is, it's a little hard to tell, but the life context inquiry still exists. I mean, we'd be tempted to think that because this is a new product, therefore everybody feels the pain the same way. It is still worthwhile to do the life context inquiry, is what I'd say. Sorry, Vijay?
Vijay has replied, and there
variant in a category. If it's a variant in a category, that's very easy to do. Because then you're understanding people and their usages of their category. You understand the people's life context and evoke the stories of who the people are and what are the choices they are living within the category. How have they made the choices that they are living within the category, and what are the compromises, the things that they have said that iska kuch nahi hoga, I have to deal with this. Like it's like how you say, if you're going to enter into a hotel, come what may, you have to check in only after 12 o'clock, and at 10 o'clock in the morning they will pester you to check out. That's a compromise everybody lives with. Somebody comes and breaks and says, hey, check in and check out whenever you want, I'll charge you for a day. There'll be a whole set of customers who want to come in there. That's a category compromise. Even to discover the category compromise, it helps to understand the context of different people, who they are and how they have dealt with the category will have a relation to who they are. And therefore, you're in a better place to pick and choose. These are my people, my solution are for these people, and I will focus all my energies on these people. And for the rest, when they touch my product, they'll get served, but I'm not going to lose sleep if they don't come to me. And you're in a better place to make those choices. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the way I'd approach it.
Yeah, I think it's 9:50.
Yeah, I think we should.
I think one question from Tirath. Maybe contextual is good for small audience, but how do we go for big numbers? Tirath, can you just? We'll take this as last question and then close it. Tirath, can you just?
Yeah. Hi. So, as an example of the digital media, because it's a large number, and so the contextual stories might work. Maybe I mean it's good. I have been part of it, but so it could work for a small. But let's say a Pantaloons, I'm assuming they'll be having a lakhs of customers, and we'll be doing interview of maybe 100 or 50 max or max to max 150. Then how do you merge this or data, and how do you get a strategy out of it? So don't you think that time we should be reliable on the data only, or algorithm, all those things?
See, that goes really to the construction of who are the 100 people or 50 people you want to meet. For doing that, you will look at the overall 1 lakh and what is your ingoing understanding of who those 100 or who the 1 lakh is. Right? If you have contextual understanding of entire 1 lakh people, 1:1 possible, no need to do this because you're serving 1:1. It's a segmentation of 1 lakh actually, you have 1 lakh segments. But that's usually not possible. Then you're trying to find some middle ground. At 1 lakh, you will get behavioral data and you can draw nice charts and say so many percentage do A, B, C, D, E. That's one level of data and then you need to have that. And then I want to get a sampling of, let's say within my 1 lakh people, what are the different clusters of people that I already see? There are these kinds of 5-6 types of groups. And then I choose my 100 people to meet within that, so I know that I have covered all the bases, right? And you'll choose it depending on whatever product category you are in. The people who are my absolute raving fans, my loyalists, people that used to be my loyalists and left me, who will tell me where I suck. My loyalists will tell me what are my strengths, or they may also tell me where I suck, but I still put up with it. But that's a construct of the strategic sample that you. But the inquiry is still, life script, contextual understanding. Why do you behave in the category the way you behave? And that why comes from the contextual understanding. You're able to put A and B together. The framework will still probably be the same until we come to a point where 1:1 is possible. 1:1 is the ultimate goal. If you can do that, that's perfect. It's a category of one.
So like what?
Okay.
Sorry. Dilip.
Yeah?
Yeah, saying something.
No.
But there's like what we normally say, that if you have to understand how the biryani or pulao tastes, I just need to taste only the top 2 or 1 spoon, that's all. So if I'm able to pick up my sample and understand that small sample very well, what we know is that actually represents the entire 1 lakh people or 100 lakh people, right? And that is enough. Because we know that we have seen 100 people and now this pattern is repeating, and therefore we don't need to actually go and search for another 100 more to see if there are any differences. We are looking at similarities. And that 100 is a good sample, even 80 is a good sample for us to really, now we are saying even 60 is good or 40 is good, to really get a good sense of who these folks are. And then I can actually extrapolate it to the entire universe. And pretty much we'll be right, 80% we should be right.
Once the stories start to repeat themselves, you'll also have confidence that you've gotten it right. It'll all be one tight puzzle. The qualitative inquiry that you are doing or the conversations that you are doing is telling you a certain story, which is getting reflected in the numbers that you are seeing. It is one story and gives you confidence to saying, okay, I can take this next, like Rajesh says, I will take from this knowledge, I will take this creatively. And that decision making becomes easy when you have both of these. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So we will close it.
Thank you, everybody. We blew our time deadline already. We have talked like 24 minutes. Thank you for everyone who's stuck with us during this time. Stay safe out there, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the next session, which is next week, which will be by Rajesh and Dilip on the magic of metaphors. I wouldn't miss that. Should be fun. Yeah. See you all. Bye-bye.